From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
A federal appeals court upholds a bias response team on a public college campus as the latest inflation figures come in at 4% year over year. Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Mene Ukwe-Barua. These sorts of bias response policies have been proliferating on college campuses, but the one we're going to discuss today is from Virginia Tech. It is officially called the Bias Intervention and Response Team, or the BIRT, and students there are encouraged to report ill-considered opinions or crass jokes that they hear on campus. The bias response team can investigate, and even if it decides that the student's speech was covered by the First Amendment, it can invite the student and the complainer to a voluntary conversation at the dean's office. A group called Speech First sued over this, and Kim, remarkably, this has now been upheld at the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in a 2-1 ruling.
Yeah, I find this absolutely stunning. So Judge Diana Gribbin-Motz, who is a Clinton appointee, and Judge Albert Diaz, who was an Obama appointee, ruled that it was perfectly okay to essentially have this Big Brother operation on Virginia Tech because BIRT specifically lacked the power to punish students. They noted that the students can even ignore those requests to come in, and pointed out that no matter what happens, if you're invited in and you don't come, none of this goes on your academic transcript or on your disciplinary record. So apparently it's all okay. Now, I mean, this is, again, quite remarkable. This is as the dissent from Judge Harvie Wilkinson, who served as the chief of that circuit for 7 years. As he pointed out, the opinion said nothing or did not deal with remotely adequately the question of whether or not the simple existence of this organization and this system could chill speech, basic protected First Amendment speech. And that we can talk more about as dissent. But yes, remarkably, this was upheld.
Here's a section of the dissent from Judge Wilkinson that I liked. He says, consider a 19-year-old sophomore at Virginia Tech sitting in a favorite class, one involving the role that race, ethnicity, and gender play in contemporary American politics. He discusses what she might be thinking during a class discussion if a controversial topic comes up. He says that she remembers that there's this bias intervention and response team. She can't remember how bias incident is defined, but she remembers that other students can report speech anonymously online. And Mene, the upshot basically is that he's making the argument that this student would think twice, and that is chilling of speech. And remember, this is a public institution. This is not a private college. It's a public college.
Exactly. I think that Judge Wilkinson's dissent was extremely artful in illustrating exactly how these types of bias response teams and the speech codes that they defend would affect the thinking and conduct of a student. And the crux is that, yes, she wouldn't necessarily face any kind of punishment for making a remark that was considered to be off color, but certainly having to go through the process of going into the office, sitting down with an administrator, defending her conduct or her speech would tend to make her much more careful about what she's able to express in a way that would chill her exercise of the First Amendment. I think one of the ironies that this case really touches on is that the stated purpose of bias response teams of the kind that Virginia Tech had is to prevent harassment from students to others. The idea is that certain types of remarks about race or gender can be insensitive to other students, and they want to make sure that they have these safeguards in place to make sure nobody crosses these lines, as Judge Wilkinson pointed out, are extremely amorphous. There's no way for a student to really remember clearly what would put them afoul of the rules. But the actual effect of these bias response teams is essentially to harass the students themselves. They create what would clearly be thought of as a hostile environment for any student who runs afoul of some of these speech codes. And so by creating these rules, which are theoretically supposed to make a safer and more inclusive campus, They're actually making a much more threatening one where any student who's expressing themselves publicly runs the risk of being hauled in to have to defend themselves in front of an administrator.
To underline a few things here, Judge Wilkinson argues that if you're a student, a sophomore, a freshman, whatever, at Virginia Tech, and you get an invitation to the dean's office, that basically, maybe you can technically turn that down, but it sounds like an offer that you probably can't refuse. He says that members of the Bias Intervention and Response Team include representatives from the Office of Student Conduct and also the Virginia Tech Police Department. According to the school, bias incidents can happen off campus. They can happen on social media. And here is the definition of a bias incident: an expression against a person or group because of the person's or group's age, color, disability, gender, including pregnancy, gender identity, gender expression, genetic information, national origin, political affiliation, race, religion, sexual orientation, veteran status, or any other basis protected by law. And Kim, one of them that jumps out to me there is political affiliation. So if you say something like communists are idiots, I suppose that is an expression against a group of people based on their political affiliation. And maybe that seems like a ludicrous example. But here is an explanation from the district court cited by Judge Wilkinson about an actual report that was apparently sent in to the bias response team. Here it is from the court ruling: a report that a student in a university residence hall overheard several male students privately, quote, talking crap about the women who were playing in a snowball fight, calling them not athletic, which the complainant reported as discrimination based on gender. And Kim, maybe that's a dumb, tactless thing to say, but if you are going to start taking anonymous reports about dumb, tactless things that are said in university residence halls, oh my.
Yes, this is why you said maybe that's a ludicrous example. Nothing is ludicrous in this system. I mean, there was a couple of other examples that were listed in Judge Wilkinson's dissent. Somebody had been reported for using Caitlyn Jenner's dead name during a class lecture. And, you gave the example of saying, well, communists are dumb. Imagine if you had someone walking around saying Democrats are dumb or the College Democratic Club is dumb. I mean, these are basic expressions of free speech, but yet in this environment, we're turning them into something that offends someone's sensitivity and therefore something worthy of administrative action. And I think that's the real problem. There's a great line in Wilkinson's dissent, and when he just says, this is not the benign little system the majority imagines. And indeed, it is not, because you put that list out there of what counts as an incident. I mean, I have it written in front of myself again, but I would struggle on a day-to-day basis if I were in that environment to remember which exactly categories of things I am or am not allowed to say that could or could not land me with an anonymous complaint. And, one of the things that the majority in this opinion actually holds up as a reason why this system works effectively and is some sort of wholesome. That's the thing about the majority opinion too. They suggest this is like a healthy, wholesome thing for a university to have because it's causing people to think before they speak and be kind and polite and learn from the experience of saying something that might offend someone else. The remarkable thing is that they say, well, look, just to prove that this is a thoughtful system, there's a whole bunch of complaints that came in that didn't actually go up to all the way to ask for a meeting or haul a student in. Those were ones that were discounted because they fell outside the realm. How many people are reporting these things anonymously all day long? They actually are advertising this on campus, encouraging kids to use it under the motto, see something, say something. And you have to wonder just how much of a daily campus life at Virginia Tech is involved with kids wandering around their residence halls looking for a reason to feel hurt or upset, and then running back to their computers to report on their fellow students.
Benet, do you suppose that this dissent is a signal flare to the justices on the Supreme Court? And one thing I would note is that the judge here, J. Harvie Wilkinson, was himself floated as a potential Supreme Court nominee back in the George W. Bush years, and obviously did not get that nod, but has stayed on the Fourth Circuit. And do you think he's written it in such a way that this will maybe get some attention upstairs? And he does note that, at least according to him, different circuits have come out different ways on this. And a circuit split is one of the things that the Supreme Court often looks for when deciding whether to grant review of cases.
I do have to say it's somewhat a depressing thought to think that the Supreme Court will have to be dragged in to rule on what is acceptable to say on college campuses and what isn't. But perhaps that's just the place where our culture is at. It has been probably somewhere between 5 to 10 years that it has been headline news, all of these stories at different campuses across America, instituting these speech codes and creating these organizations to police speech. And it is something that administrators on college campuses have found themselves unable to deal with, and where there really are competing legal theories about what is and isn't acceptable, particularly at public universities like Virginia Tech. And so I do think from the perspective of some of these administrators, there is a history of codes of conduct on campus. Obviously, these campuses are not necessarily identical with the public square, where people are able to do and say absolutely anything, and it is reasonable for them to expect that their students are going to abide by some kinds of restrictions on what they're able to do and say with regard to their peers. But it is obvious to everyone with an understanding of the liberal tradition in America that many of these universities have gone way too far in policing speech. And so perhaps this is an issue that is crying out for a clear resolution in terms of what is the legal standard for how speech can be policed. And again, as you said, particularly because different circuit courts of appeals have come out in different ways on this, this could be an area where the Supreme Court would provide a public benefit by creating some resolution.
Kim, the other thought I have here, and this is often where I end up when we talk about these campus controversies, is how do these administrators think that what they're doing is helping their students turn into well-formed adults? And I don't think that there's no situation where an administrator might want to get involved in some kind of interpersonal conflict between students, if there's harassment, if some troll on campus thinks it's funny to go around yelling racial slurs just to make up an example. I don't think there's no situation where administrators might want to step in. But this idea that you publicly advertise, if you hear a insensitive joke or something like that, please fill out this online form to tell an adult. It just strikes me as more coddling of these people who are A, of the age of majority and are actually adults and are legally responsible for their own actions, and B, are supposed to be the leaders who are going to go out into America and become bosses and work at workplaces and, the next generation to lead this country. And the idea that this is how we're preparing them, boy, it gives me some pause.
Absolutely. Look, we expect in a lot of liberal arts colleges, even a lot of state universities, they set up a system whereby it's understood that the kids that are coming there, they still have some things to learn, right? In particular about human interaction. This is often why a lot of schools have residential colleges that freshmen are required, sometimes sophomores are required to be in. It makes more of a kind of home or community environment. Often there are senior classmen or graduate students who sort of exist there as, sort of dorm wing, like parents and waiting, they're there to settle disputes, deal with squabbles, and get kids to talk to each other in a civil way, to explain to them part of being an adult, part of living out on your own, part of working in a new community is figuring out how to interact with your peers and to do so in a productive manner. It is unclear to me how setting up a system whereby instead you are encouraged to go rat out and complain against your peers and your neighbors, how that in any way is turning you into a functioning adult. And that's before you get to the question about free speech and debate. Okay, because it's one thing just to be rude, but it's another thing where in your attempt to get kids to not be offensive, outright offensive to someone in a really ugly way, that instead you are stripping entirely the right or the ability of kids to speak freely, voice disagreements with thoughts or ideas, voice disagreements with their peers. Again, hopefully in a civil and respectful manner. But none of this is geared around creating that type of environment. And the real pity of it is college is such a special place. These several years where you get to go and you get to kind of pretend you're a grown-up, but you're not really there yet. And this is a perfect opportunity to be learning all these lessons. And instead, this is just all the wrong message.